I love Limbus Company. To any of the people who know me on Discord, you already know this. But to the people who don't, this is Limbus Company, a turn-based team-building gacha game with one of the best stories and characters I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing in the 2 years this game has been out, and likely for long after the game's done. Inside this game, however, is the subject of today's video, the status effects. More specifically, where each of them are in terms of how well they are designed, how they work, how effective they are, and personally, how enjoyable it is to use them. And, of course, this will only be about main story content. No mirror dungeons or railways, as they are heavily different from the main game experience. Limbus Company has 7 core status effects, one for each sin affinity. Burn for wrath, bleed for lust, tremor for sloth, rupture for gluttony, sinking for gloom, poise for pride, and charge for envy. All of them do something unique to one another, however not all of them are treated equally in terms of what gets added, changed, or improved. So let's go over them in order of sin, starting with my original love from Library of Ruina, Burn. Burn was the primary status effect I used back in Library of Ruina. It's how I cheesed a ton of content before it got rightfully nerfed, but in Limbus it behaves a bit differently. Instead of doing its damage and then having the count next turn, it only reduces count by 1, meaning so long as you can keep the count high, you can do upwards of 99 unmitigated damage every single turn, possibly more if the enemy has multiple parts and all have burn on them as well. It's a good, passive way to damage enemies while you focus on clashing and doing damage, all while keeping its count and potency up so you don't lose it. However, that is it. As for keyword changes, it only gets one notable type that we've had for over a year, Dark Flame. Released with the second Walpurgis Nacht, Magic Bullet Audis brought a new burn type that, at turn end and with how much Dark Flame is on the enemy, deals additional damage as pride damage. While amazing and really boosted Burn's damage through the roof, it was just as boring as Burn normally. Her kit was more revolved around her magic bullets than Burn, but she provided the biggest band-aid fix we'd ever received, as the ID who came before her is no longer a band-aid solution to their status effect now. We'll get to her later. For IDs, the archetype has quite a few good ones, most notably being the Lu Association. We have 7 team members for the team, alongside LCE Faust, Sync East Dawn, the aforementioned Magic Bullet Audis, and him. A really good lineup of IDs, some dated yet still usable to some degree, albeit with some noticeable power creep. Overall, Burn is in a weak spot in terms of how the effect is utilized, but it does not make it a bad status in the slightest. It's possibly the easiest offensive status effect in the game to maintain, requiring little to no strategy to keep it up and running. If you main Burn teams, power to you. Next is Bleed, and oh boy, what a jump. Bleed is undoubtedly in the strongest position it'll ever be in, at least for now. The way Bleed works is different to Burn. It still relies on potency to do damage, and count is just how much it can be used before disappearing. But instead of doing damage at turn end, it does damage every time a coin is used for an attack. Let's say an enemy has a 4 coin attack and they're not in a clash. They have 12 potency and 4 count. Every attack will proc Bleed, dealing 12 damage, a total of 48 because of the 4 count. Now, if they were clashing, it'd still do damage, because an attack was being used. Longer clashes, so long as you have the count to sustain it, is much more beneficial than simply doing raw damage, as the bulk of your damage relies on the enemy acting, rather than being a pincushion. For IDs, as well as keywords since they're interwoven with the IDs more so than most teams, Bleed has some of the best units in the game. Kurikumo, N-Corp, and the La Mancha Land Blood Fiends being the main 3 teams people think of. Kurikumo focuses more on unbreakable coins and gets stronger if more of the team is on the field, or if some die. Encore primarily focuses on Lust Resonance and the first of two keywords, Nails, which increases the damage Encore units do against those targets, as well as giving bleed count to the enemy next turn by its own count, then having a turn end. Finally, the Blood Fiends give the biggest change to any status effect in the game, Blood Feast. Blood Feast stores all damage dealt by bleed, resetting only when moving into a different zone. Units that utilize Blood Feast, the Blood Fiends, gain crazy powerful stats and effects when enough is on the field, and when consumed by certain abilities and attacks. If a unit fails to consume any Blood Feast, they instead gain bleed and take damage to increase it themselves, ensuring that it will go up so they can use it the next time. This is by far the most unique and game-changing addition any archetype has gotten, making both Ego and IDs hit far harder, giving unique effects, buffs, and can also affect the environment around you. Bleed is insanely strong, possibly the strongest out of all the status effects. From the IDs, the damage potential, and the insane addition that Blood Feast is, you should not sleep on bleed teams. Tremor is interesting. Instead of doing any form of damage directly, it's more of a support status. Building Tremor up does nothing, however, when a unit triggers Tremor Burst, count is reduced by the amount the burst says, then raises the target's stagger bar by the potency amount. This is the stagger status effect, where burn is DOT and bleed is clashing. Tremor is more focused on staggering an opponent to let you do as much damage as possible with your attacks, as a staggered opponent takes fatal damage from all primary damage sources, more depending on stagger level. Tremor's IDs have been quite rocky since the game came out, until our first ever Walpurgisnacht. In comes the ID everyone thinks about, Regret Faust. Just like Magic Bullet Autus, Regret Faust was once a band-aid fix for Tremor, fixing some of the issues and basically being required for any and all Tremor teams to be even viable in content back then. While still a good ID, you can finally stop bringing her and use other units now that Tremor has a foothold, unless you are one of the few that love using Everlasting. Other notable units include the Eurodivi, T-Corp, the Ufi Association Heathcliff ID, Thumb, Sinclair, and Rousseau, and the 2 Zwei West units. All of them are strong and utilize the effect in their own ways, including their own gimmicks, making the status effect more unique with how varied it can be. Speaking of, Tremor has the most keyword changes out of all the status effects, with 14 different types of Tremor. Tremor, Tremor Burst, Amplitude Entanglement, and the many flavors of Tremor that the IDs bring. Now, despite all this variety, some of the effects are boring or just not as good as others. The 3 damage-focused Tremors, being Reverb, Scorch, and Hemorrhage, are all the same, dealing extra damage on Tremor Burst as Sin damage, being Sloth, Wrath, and Lust respectively. Comparing that to Decay or Clockwinding, which debuffs enemies or buffs the unit instead of raw damage, makes them seem a bit uninspired and change how an archetype works. Outside of unique Tremor types, some units actually apply Tremor to themselves, using it as a currency to boost their attacks, apply more effects, or make their attacks do something new. Typically, it's either a coin power or clash power buff, but units like Eurodivi Lu can trigger Amplitude Entanglement and swap the Tremor of the target to Reverb, as an example. Despite having the highest variety and some great units, Tremor does suffer from being a bit samey and not as good as for damage unless using the damaging Tremor types like Reverb, in which case you could probably just use any other team and do just as good. Not bad, but not as powerful as Bleed and our next status. Buckle up folks, this one's gonna be a lot longer than the other entries. As of the making of this video, we are more than halfway through Season 6, and this season was almost entirely about Rupture. Rupture has had the most volatile relationship in all of Limbus, having been a horrible status effect back in Season 1, but when Season 2 rolled around, Rupture gained a keyword that changed it for the better and the worst. But that is later. For now, let's see how it works. On hit, decrease count by 1, dealing true damage equal to the potency on the target. You'd think this is far, far simpler than Bird. Just stack as much content and potency on them as possible. What's the downside? Simple. The identities are dog shit. For the longest time, up until the release of Deviat's and the Season 5 starter identities, Rupture's identities have been objectively the worst in the game. Terrible rolls, barely any count, more coins than count, and overall were just awful. Most of the IDs back then, well, they weren't good at all. Until Season 2. Red Sheet Sinclair, otherwise known as Talisman Sinclair, was the biggest buff Rupture had received, as well as its biggest issue made manifest, the Rupturing Talisman. If you or an enemy had a talisman on you, the following would happen. On hit, apply 1 Rupture potency, and on getting hit, gain 1 potency. His skill 3 would apply, if you built it up correctly, can apply 5 of it to an enemy. So long as you kept using count positive skills, you could utterly ruin any and all bosses in the game, with a few caveats. It was RNG dependent, unfun to do, and remember, he's a Rupture ID, so his rolls were completely terrible. All of that, however, means nothing now that after he was nerfed into the ground. Talisman now eating count to apply more potency, actually damaging your stack. I hope that's how it works. Reading it does make my head hurt a little. Continuing on with the IDs, Gen 2 of Rupture does exist in the form of the Heishao pack, including Hierarch candidate Ishmael and Lord of Hongwan Honglu. All of these identities, which are not all added yet, are incredibly powerful, fun to use, and some of the worst Rupture IDs in the game. Let me explain. The Heishaos, while fun to use, do not really care about Rupture. They are more focused on damage through skills rather than Rupture damage. Back then, you had to build your team carefully and use skills that would increase count and only use high coin skills when you can afford to. Now you can just use what works and not care at all about the Rupture stack. It's secondary now. The other half of the Heishao, though, is actually good, and I love it. The Death Rites. Almost all of the current Heishao identities have a Death Rite, a unique Rupture that behaves almost like Blood Feast, but you have to keep it applied rather than it being passive all the time and snowballing. Each of them is fun and unique to each Heishao branch, and a really good way to make a unique keyword change. Overall, Rupture is the rockiest slope in Limbus. It's had high highs and tremendously low lows, now being in a good position, albeit for the wrong reasons in my humble opinion. It requires a lot of planning and team composition to make it work, and consistently too. Or you can just run the Heishao team and almost ignore Rupture completely, and still clear through most of the content in the game. Personally, I hate Rupture, as fun as Lord Honglu is. So I lied. This might be the longest. If Bird and Bleed are my number 1 and number 2 favorite status effects, Sinking is my 3rd favorite. When hit, target loses sanity by the sinking potency, then reduce the count by each hit. However, in battles where sanity is not a thing, such as abnormalities, Sinking will instead do gloom damage by the potency count instead, which can be increased or decreased depending on the target's gloom resistance. This is the only status effect in the game to change depending on the type of battle, which keeps it viable and usable in both forms of the game's content. Sinking identities are a lot more open to combinations, as it's probably the only status I don't run a mono team with normally, as the only pure team we can have can reliably sacrifice 2 of its own members for other best-in-slot units, being the Wuthering Heights team. All 6 of the IDs in this team are still very good, even the weaker ones still providing benefits, be it an ego or status effect of their own, or just being a good damage dealer. The 4 butlers, Audis, Faust, Ishmael, and Ryoshu, Edgar family Gregor, and the main unit of the entire team, Wild Hunt Heathcliff. Outside of this team, you have other amazing units, such as Molar Boatworks Ishmael, the Daiichi IDs, the Reindeers, the Knight of Despair Rhodia, and the 2 sinking IDs that Yi Song owns, Solemn Lament and Spice Bush. Now, this is a topic some people have, my friend group included, and I am on the side of saying that Spice Bush is still relevant and viable to use in modern day content. He was not overshadowed by Solemn Lament, he is a side grade. Solemn Lament is way better in battles where sanity is the thing, while Spice Bush is a master at non-sanity battles thanks to one of Sinking's most powerful keywords, Sinking Deluge. Sinking Deluge is incredibly powerful for what it is. So long as the target has at least 6 sinking, Spice Bush will trigger Sinking Deluge, causing all of the sinking on the target, including count, to be burst all at once as gloom damage. If the target had 30 potency and 5 count, Deluge would cause 150 damage, more or less depending on resistances. This makes Spice Bush a nuke, but because of how short chain battles are, which is where most of sanity based encounters are, you'll never get to use it often, if at all, which is why our second keyword is better, Butterfly. I won't go into too much detail, as Butterfly is a long status effect with much nuance. However, I will keep it short. Potency and count are replaced with the living and the departed, respectively. When hitting a target, you will heal sanity based on the living's potency, all while dealing gloom damage by the departed's count, but only if the target's sanity is 0 or less. I believe I am reading this correctly, there is a bit more, but please, go check out Kaskazuk's video on Solemn Lament, he explains it far better than I can. The last sinking keyword that makes sinking extremely potent is exclusive to the Wuthering Heights team, Echoes of the Manor. Butler, Faust, and Autus, as well as Ishmael's Bygone Days ego, all can inflict echoes, which gives a 50-50 chance for an additional sinking count to be applied when inflicting either potency or count to the target, as well as changing their panic type to Echoes of the Manor. Instead of changing the panic type, sanity-less enemies will instead have a 10% decreased chance to roll heads on attacks, making it a 60-40 chance in your favor for them to roll tails. For most fights, this is a godsend, as it makes clashing easier and lost clashes safer as their damage will be lower. Earl King also has his own version of Echoes, being Impending Ruin, which includes the 10% coin effect, but also makes low morale enemies lose 1 clash power and gain 3 sinking on turn end. When panicked, they lose more clash power and gain more sinking. I am honestly upset that a lot of people still think that sinking is underpowered or not relevant, as the IDs and status effect itself is still the most consistent and powerful it's been. Echoes alone is what's keeping sinking stupidly powerful in most encounters. If people still think burn is overpowered because of Dark Flame, but say sinking is bad because all it has is echoes, they're virtually the same thing, but one actually helps make the effect better in all regards, rather than just being a band-aid that never got touched up on in almost 2 years. Our first of 2 passive effects, Poise, is more focused on making you hit harder with critical hits. Each point of potency is equal to a 5% chance to crit, 20% damage buff, up to 20 potency, where you will crit with every single hit. Besides losing 1 count every turn, every crit will also decrease count by 1 as well. This is an effect that requires some upkeep to keep at a high count, and personally I believe 20% extra damage is just not as worthwhile compared to the other effects Limbus has. There are 2 words that come to mind whenever Poise is mentioned: Blade Lineage. The Blade Lineage team is our only full team that makes use of Poise primarily, albeit with one small exception. Their entire gimmick is similar to the Kurakumo team, where having a full team of members increases their power. Besides that, they also share Poise with one other team, as well as some skills giving additional Poise when used, passives giving extra clash when at a certain threshold, or for so, giving every skill 1 and skill 2 more vital power for that turn. Besides them, another team that uses Poise, although with Bleed as another focus, is the Pekod crew. Full Stop Office is another. Another ID that would be noted to mention is LCB Ryoshu, Pirate Gregor, and Feldbullet Isan. So, Poise's keywords are lacking, to say the least. The two main ones are from the Thoracalcia Ego for Ryoshu and Faust, being the 2 breaths and the 2 nebulizers. For Ryoshu, she has Deep Inhale and Nebulizer Beta. Deep Inhale simply consumes a certain amount of Poise potency to deal extra crit damage depending on how much was used, while Nebulizer Beta applies 3 Poise count and potency between all allies whenever you trigger Pride Absolute Resonance. For Faust, you have Shallow Exhale and Nebulizer Alpha. Shallow Exhale only triggers at 20 plus potency, gaining 1 count whenever you gain potency with this skill and its coin's effects. Nebulizer Alpha is far simpler than Beta, giving all allies 1 potency and count for every turn. Now, while both Ego do a lot more than what I've just said, I am only looking at keywords here, not the entire effect list, as we'd be here for longer than the Rupture or Sinking segment, maybe a lot longer. Again, go check out Kaskazhuk's video on these two. The last unique Poise that I know of, and don't really care about, is Red Plum Blossom, Blade Lineage Faust's core keyword. On crit, your skills will apply a varying amount of Blossom, depending on the skill. If this target is the main one, you gain a 10% increased chance for this unit to attack critically. When struck by a crit, the target gains bleed equal to half of the value, then reduces by 1. It seems to be taking some liberties and adding the small amounts of bleed that Brielle Subclair and Merceau do on their skill 3 and skill 3-2, respectively. A small pittance of extra damage on top of your extra damage. While the Blade Lineage team is quite powerful still, and Poise just being some extra damage, it's honestly quite boring. It's a currency that only gets better with itself and only provides a decent amount of extra damage, and the keywords from the Ego are far more beneficial to a team that can't gain as much Poise as opposed to a Poise focus identity, i.e. the Pekods. If any status were to get a buff outside of Project Moon just tying a metric fuckton of damage on crit, it'd be Poise. Lastly, we have the final core status effect in Limbus, and our second passive effect. Charge is another currency type of status, being used to fuel certain attacks and passives. Unlike the other effects, the number you will rely on is count, and for the longest time, Charge only had count. Up until Warp Outus and the 2 multi-crack IDs, Charge potency wasn't a thing. It always stayed at 1. Charge does nothing by itself, being entirely just currency. So sadly, I cannot explain what Charge does other than this. There are almost 2 full teams that make use of Charge. The first, and only full team currently, is W Corp. Their skills all rely on Charge, primarily their skill 3s, which use up a large amount of charge to supercharge the skill and unleash a large amount of damage, as well as extra effects, such as Fragile or Rupture. The other team is R Corp, consisting of Rabbit Heathcliff, Reindeer Ishmael and Hong Lu, Rhino Merceau, and soon-to-be Rhino Gregor. I hope, one day. There are the multi-cracks, Heathcliff and Faust, but they are incredibly busted, in a good way, being a mix of damage and support. You can really mix and match with this team and it will always work, very consistent type. So, Charge only has one direct keyword, and I'll explain in the next one what I mean. And this is Load. Warp Outus can apply load to herself and allies when the highest resonance hits a certain amount, going up to 5 allies at max. If a skill consumes charge, they deal 2.5% more damage for every value of load on the unit, up to 6 load or 15% damage. If that unit was from W Corp, it is instead increased to 5% and 30% respectively. As for the other keywords, Charge has the other two: Photoelectricity from Multicrack Heathcliff, and Charge Barrier from Warp Hong Lu. Barrier is a shield that Hong Lu can give himself and allies with the lowest HP, its strength depending on how much charge was spent. Photoelectricity is a bit different. Depending on how much charge potency Heathcliff has, it can go up to 3 value. When that unit is hit, the attacker gains charge count equal to the value, once per skill. If the attacker has less than 5 count, they gain an additional 3 count. Charge is pretty stagnant, staying in almost the same spot it has been in since launch, barely receiving any changes other than some units having use for potency and the introduction of Photoelectricity and Charge Barrier, giving it more of a supportive option. Overall, the status is pretty good, but we'll need some sort of variance to keep it interesting, possibly a bleed charge ID, like in Warp Express. Who knows? So that is how I personally think the status effects in Limbus Company are at the moment. While the usual suspects are in the highest of viability, I know I might get some flack for saying stuff on Poise or syncing, especially from the Poise enjoyers. However, this video was a lot of fun to make. I get to talk about 2 years worth of experience on a game I very much love. If anyone else has their own takes, leave them down below. Just please be respectful. It is only my opinion, as nothing I said should be taken as fact. I might even be wrong and have likely forgotten a lot of stuff. Please, have a nice day, and cheers lads.